Hi everyone, welcome back to my top 20 favorite films of all time countdown. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into number 18. Number 18. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. This is by far one of my favorite Disney films, pretty much of all time, with the exception of some Pixar films. Hunchback, for me, was one of the biggest risks that the Disney studio took during the Disney Renaissance. And yes, I do consider it part of the Disney Renaissance. I know a lot of people, they consider up to Pocahontas the Renaissance, and then after that is when they consider things got a little bit iffy for the studio. But for me, Hunchback is one of the first times watching a movie in a theater where I felt this immense fear and this intense emotion and tension when watching a film, and it was animated too. And plus, obviously, this is a story that has kind of been done over and over again. We all know that. And I don't mean specifically the Hunchback story. I mean, the you may be ugly on the outside, but you're beautiful on the inside kind of thing. I mean, Disney pretty much had already done this, a few years earlier with Beauty and the Beast. It's not really that new of a story. It's not necessarily the story or the more generic parts of it, I want to say, that are what draw me to it. What draws me to it, and I hate to use the word too much, but it has this sense of scale, and it's an epic story that's being told. And I mean that on the sense that it's on a grander scale than I think a lot of the Disney movies had been. I mean, for me, The Little Mermaid was a very, I don't want to say toned down, because it was the movie that kind of set off the Disney Renaissance, although a lot of people do credit Who Framed Roger Rabbit with that. But to me, there's something about The Little Mermaid where it's like you can sense that it was like the training wheels for Disney. And as much as I liked Beauty and the Beast, and as much as I liked Lion King and Aladdin and Pocahontas, and believe me, Pocahontas was one of my favorite Disney films for the longest time. I know a lot of people don't really like it that much, but I loved it when I was a kid. I was so drawn into the characters, and I was just really into the storyline for some reason. As an adult, yeah, I know that there's huge problems with Pocahontas, but something about Hunchback, after when I saw it, after having already seen pretty much every other Disney movie that had come out before that, you have to understand where I'm coming from on this, and so sorry if you guys can hear the noise that's coming from upstairs. You kind of have to understand where I'm coming from on this, because I was a kid that watched a ton of television and movies as a kid. I I didn't even do my homework most of the time because I was sitting in front of a television so much. I had pretty much I had pretty much watched every single Disney movie by the time The Lion King had come out. And The Lion King came out in 1994. At the time, I would have only been 4 years old. It was by no means, a labor for me to get through all the Disney movies that had come out before that. So I was well versed in the Disney universe by the time Hunchback had come out. And in my memory at that time, nothing had compared to Hunchback. Nothing in terms of animation, in terms of its scale, had impacted me the way that I think Hunchback did. The only part of the movie that I would say that I really don't like, really, is the gargoyles. The gargoyles were really the only part of the movie that I ever really had problems with. And even when I was a kid, I had a problem with the gargoyles. I always felt that they just, like, even when you're a kid and you don't even understand the rules of filmmaking, I understood that the gargoyles were a huge tonal shift between, what was going on in the rest of the film, and then all of a sudden when you have comic relief, and musical numbers going on the side. I've heard the idea before that the gargoyles were sort of meant to be this like figment of Quasimodo's imagination, like they're his imaginary friends because he's been so lonely. Unfortunately, this is completely counteracted because in the climax we clearly see them being active agents in what's going on, and they are clearly having an impact in what's going on in the climax. So it's not really something that you can justify, but even ignoring the gargoyles, I think the film is good on the merits that it's the Disney movie I think that takes the most risk and it takes the most chances by going with a subject matter that is so risky. You have religious subtext. I don't even think I should be calling it subtext. It's more like it's not undertones. It's very big overtones. The ideas of ethnic cleansing and divine right and all this kind of and even the predominantly with the villain of the film, Frollo. He's probably the one Disney villain I think that goes through the most conflict as to what he's doing, because for the most part you have Disney villains that are either evil just for the sake of being evil or they're trying to just take over the world because of some grudge or something. Frollo is the one Disney villain where you can tell he's actually having an internal struggle with what he's doing. He's not necessarily sorry for what he's done, but he feels sorry because he's feeling emotions that he thinks his religion dictates is bad. He feels that lusting after this woman is a sin. For the most part, he does a lot of things in the movie because he thinks it's basically religiously the right thing to do, despite the fact that it's morally wrong and it's ethically wrong. But in the time period, it makes total sense. And it was one of the first times where I encountered a villain that I thought was really complex and really, torn over what's going on. It was also one of the first times that, other than Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that I encountered such heavy sexual undertones in an animated film. Realistically, I hadn't encountered it that much at that point in my childhood. I think Hunchback came out in 1996, so at the time I would have been 6 years old. A few years later, I ended up watching a lot of animated stuff that was far more mature than what I should have been watching. I mean, I watched Ninja Scroll when I was 8 years old. It was not uncommon for me to be watching stuff that was more mature than what I should have been watching only a few years later. But at the time that Hunchback came out, it was the most mature thing that I had seen, and it is to me probably one of the more complex and morally gray Disney films that's out there. Do I think the songs are necessarily all good? Not really. I do think it has some of the most. It does have some iconic songs in terms of the Disney universe. Like, I do like Out There. I know the singing isn't necessarily that great, but it kind of it matches the personality and the sort of timidness of Quasimodo, and I think the fact that he isn't a great singer, it kind of matches the fact that he also doesn't look a certain way, but that, there is a sense of innocence in how he sings, which is very appropriate. I do really like God Help the Outcasts. I do think that it does have some elements in it that are really strong and are really good, and if Disney had just let themselves go a little bit more in terms of breaking away from the general pattern that they had at the time, with comic relief in particular, I think it could have been an amazingly good movie, and I think a lot of people would consider it much higher on their Disney lists. I know there are some people who really like Hunchback, but for the most part, people tend to like Lion King more, or Beauty and the Beast more, or Aladdin more, or The Little Mermaid more. And Hunchback I have pretty much always liked way more than the other Disney Renaissance films. So that's my number 18 on my top 20 favorite films of all time countdown. Come back tomorrow for number 17 and continue watching until we reach my number 1 favorite film of all time. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you later.